Good afternoon, everybody. My name is
Hello.
Mary Emmy, and I'm the Executive Director of the North Jersey Transportation Planning Authority. And I want to thank you all for joining us today. Public input is a critical component of our work, and your feedback is going to help us as we draft our next long-range transportation plan, which we've called Plan 2050, People, Transportation, Opportunity. I also want to thank Barka Patel, who represents Jersey City on our Board of Trustees, for joining us today to talk about some of the great work that their city is doing to improve bicycle and pedestrian travel and to make it safer. Bicycle and pedestrian safety was a topic that we heard a lot about during our first round of public outreach this past fall. And that's why we've decided to dedicate an event to that topic today. We also held a discussion on transportation and business last week, and we have a transit-focused event planned for Thursday if you'd like to join us again. The NJTPA has long supported active transportation in our long-range plans. We recently published a background paper on active transportation that highlights some of our ongoing work and goals in this area. You can find that paper on our website. This work includes our local safety program, which funds infrastructure improvements, including pedestrian safety upgrades and bicycle lanes. Our Complete Streets Technical Assistance Program, which works with municipalities, funds walking audits to identify needed pedestrian and bicyclist improvements, bicycle corridor plans, and other similar efforts. We also fund studies like the Jersey City Pedestrian Enhancement Plan, Bike Passaic County, and the Morris Canal Greenway Corridor Study, which mapped a route for a continuous 111-mile trail across our region, connecting Warren County to Hudson County. We also work with the New Jersey Department of Transportation to provide grants to communities for things like on and off-road paths and Rails to Trails projects. These grants have been used to construct portions of the Morris Canal Greenway and other trails in our region. And while safety and active transportation are key components of our long-range plans, we know there's always more work to be done, and we appreciate having you join us today to help us create a shared vision for the future. So thank you again for taking the time to provide your input today. And I'm now going to turn the program over to Ted Ritter from the NJTPA staff, who will tell you a little bit more about our plan. Thank you.
Mary, thanks a lot, and good afternoon, everyone. I hope you're in the process of getting dug out from the snow. I hope my cyclist friends remember to put on the European snow tires with the studs so they could get around on their bikes. Welcome to our topic talk on bicycle and pedestrian safety, a big topic. I'm Ted Ritter, in case you don't know me. I know some of you, but with the North Jersey Transportation Planning Authority, better known as the NJTPA. And this topic talk is, really part of a whole series that we've been doing to gather input from people like you for the NJTPA's next long-range plan that Mary talked about, Plan 2050. All right, agenda time. After I provide you with some background, we're going to go into small group discussions about issues relating specifically to bicycle and pedestrian safety. We're looking here not so much for complaints, but for real ideas and solutions, because I think we did a pretty good job in the visioning phase of our outreach identifying the problems. So now what we want to do is drill down, tell us how to fix the problems. Okay, so in case you're not familiar with the NJTPA, real quick on this, the 101, we are the federally authorized metropolitan planning organization for the 13-county northern central New Jersey region. This slide shows the NJTPA region there in blue, the map. Okay, so our board of trustees consists of an elected official from each of these 13 counties, plus the two largest cities in the region, Newark and Jersey City. And then our board also has representatives from several partner agencies at the state and regional level. So now real quick, let's talk about the NJTPA's next long-range transportation plan. Mary alluded to that in her opening remarks, Plan 2050, one of our most important board-approved products. We are required by federal law to update it every 4 years. You can think of Plan 2050 really as a vision for the region's transportation future. So it includes forecasts for the region's ever-changing population and how we expect our transportation system to respond to that. How will our travel patterns change over time? How many trips are going to take place and by what mode in the region? Plan 2050 also will show the region's transportation needs, what strategic transportation improvements that we need to make. And that's super duper important because we know that investing in transportation improvements, all modes, not only helps people get around easier and safer, but also pays dividends in terms of economic opportunities, access, jobs, creating those great places that you want to live, work, play, and visit. So another huge part of Plan 2050, of course, is sort of why we're here this afternoon, public engagement. We began Plan 2050 public engagement last fall. We'll be wrapping up in another week or so. So far, more than 1,500 people and counting have taken our short Plan 2050 survey. You'll see the link in the next slide. We've also held a series of, like this one, a virtual public meeting series, partner organization meetings, 3 very successful TPA Tuesday symposiums on a variety of topics relating to transportation, people, and opportunity, and extensive social media interactions that continue. And through it all, we've had a number of issues that have come up fairly consistently. People do see themselves post-pandemic getting around by public transportation. They want more focus on things like bicycle and pedestrian infrastructure and bicycle and pedestrian safety, and better accessibility and equity in transportation across all modes and all place types. So we're really looking forward to a great talk today. I just want to give you a heads up that we are recording our breakout sessions today, and that's for note-taking purposes only. We're not going to publicly share the recordings or anything like that. Just wanted you to be aware of it as a heads up. So look, thanks very much for your interest in Plan 2050 and for helping us really create a better transportation future. That's what this is all about. That's what we all want to do, regardless of our positions on any issues or anything like that. Many thanks to our co-host for today's talk, the New Jersey Bike and Walk Coalition. They not only helped make this program possible today, but they shared it with all their contacts. We certainly appreciate that sort of support. And right now, I'd like to welcome Deb Kagan, Executive Director of the New Jersey Bike and Walk Coalition, say a quick hello and introduce our featured speaker on the topic of bicycle and pedestrian safety. I'll catch up with you guys later. Thanks.
Hi, Ted. Thanks very much for the introduction. We're very excited to be part of this session and looking forward to hearing what everybody has to say. So certainly in this past year, we've seen a lot of activity in terms of bike and ped safety and an increase in some crashes, and some towns and cities certainly have found new ways to address how to deal with bike and ped safety, especially with the increase in use of our streets for that. So today we have a short presentation by Barka Patel, who is the Transportation Planning Director for the City of Jersey City. And Jersey City has done an amazing job this year of putting together bike and pedestrian safety infrastructure and implementation of their Vision Zero policy in a very short period of time. So we're very excited to hear from Barka Patel, and I'm going to turn it over to her right now. Thank you all.
Okay, hello everyone. My name is Barka Patel. I'm the Director of Transportation Planning for the City of Jersey City, and I'm going to be sharing with you Jersey City's approach to addressing bicycle and pedestrian safety issues, specifically over the past 2 or 3 years. And as Ted mentioned, I'm going to follow the theme of keeping this presentation solution-oriented and share a few projects that we've undertaken over the past few years to specifically address better streets and better places for bicycles and pedestrians. So to start, I just want to share that Jersey City is a Vision Zero city. Many of you may know what Vision Zero is. It's a national and international initiative to address traffic safety and specifically traffic-related fatalities on our roadways. The Vision Zero network offers this explanation. Vision Zero starts with the ethical belief that everyone has the right to move safely in their communities, and that the system designers and policymakers share the responsibility to ensure safe systems for travel. And this is really a shift in the approach from how people have thought about traffic safety in the past, because it acknowledges that traffic safety or traffic fatalities specifically are preventable. It acknowledges that human error is inevitable on our streets, but that human error should not lead to something as severe as incapacitating injuries or death on our streets. And it also acknowledges that saving lives is not expensive. And so this has been the guiding principle for Jersey City and how we've been dealing with pedestrian and bicycle safety issues over the past few years. In Jersey City specifically, the Safe Streets Advocacy started as a community-led process, and it resulted in the city responding with a pretty aggressive commitment to eliminate all traffic fatalities and severe injuries on city streets by the year 2026. And this was a commitment that our mayor made, Stephen Fulop, and passed an executive order that charged a task force of various city agencies to come together and figure out how exactly we were going to achieve this goal of completely eliminating traffic fatalities from our streets. And so in order to do that, we took a hard look at the data. We reviewed 10 years of crash data in Jersey City and found that over those 10 years, in an average year, Jersey City traffic crashes resulted in 20 severe injuries and 9 fatalities. And when we dug a little bit deeper, we realized really who the vulnerable users were on our streets, which is not really surprising or anything different from what other streets have or other cities have found. So if you look at the top 2 pie charts, you'll see a representation of all crashes over those 10 years. And you can see that overwhelmingly motor vehicles make up 91 to 94% of all crashes on either city roads or all roads, which means city, county, and state in Jersey City. But when we look at the bottom 2 pie charts that represent fatal crashes, you can see an overrepresentation of specifically pedestrians, but also cyclists. So for example, on city roads, while pedestrians made up only 6% of all crashes, they made up 57% of fatal crashes. So disproportionately, people who are pedestrians are dying as a result of crashes in Jersey City, as are cyclists. When we look even further, we found that there was a minority of streets in Jersey City that was responsible for a majority of where the crashes were happening. So for example, over that 10-year period, we found that just 14% of the road miles were responsible for 55% of all crashes and 61% of fatal crashes. And having this deep understanding of the data helped us create an action plan that could prioritize investments and focus on these few streets in order to maximize our impact. And the other thing we did in developing a Vision Zero action plan was to have a very robust community outreach process so that we could present the data that we were finding back to the community and see if our insights of the numbers were matching what people's experience was on the streets, and also to ask if there was anything we were missing specifically related to equity while looking at the data. So all of this resulted in an action plan with very detailed actions and strategies of how Jersey City could actually achieve this goal of eliminating fatalities and severe injuries. And our way of moving from plan to action was using a tactical urbanism approach, which is defined as a city, organization, or citizen-led approach to neighborhood building using short-term, low-cost, and scalable interventions in order to catalyze long-term change. So for those of you who are familiar with tactical urbanism, which is also sometimes called DIY urbanism, you know that there's a spectrum for this kind of approach. There's a spectrum for both what the tactics are, which is what the actual actions are, and then also for who the players or the actors are in this approach. And in our case, we addressed this by advancing city-sanctioned tactical urbanism projects, where the city was actually taking the lead, approving these types of interventions, and then going out and actually implementing them to see change. And so for the next few slides, I'm going to go through examples of things we've done to start with tactical urbanism and then scale the projects up into citywide programs. The first example of that is curb extensions. And this is an example of a tactical urbanism curb extension that we implemented through our pedestrian plan using colorful paint. This was only in place for a few hours. We used washable paint, and it was really just to draw attention to the types of improvements a city could advance to address pedestrian safety issues. An example of this is at an intersection in Jersey City of Bergen Avenue and Sip Avenue. It's a 7-lane roadway with a median in the center, a 96-foot crosswalk, and you can just imagine the types of issues that would exist here, not just for the average user, but for people on the extremes, for those with mobility challenges, for kids, for the elderly. And our approach is very much to think about all ages and abilities, and also to think about people who would be on the extremes, not just the average user. So in this case, we started with a demonstration project in the fall of 2017, where we used colorful paint to draw attention to curb extensions as a type of improvement, which are proven to improve the visibility of pedestrians at corners, to reduce the crossing distance, and to reduce vehicle speeds around corners. And once this demonstration, which again only lasted for a few hours, the paint washed away with the rain. Once this was successful and people were really interested and wanted the city to do more of this, we went back and upgraded this design to a semi-permanent treatment, where we used semi-permanent paint that wouldn't wash away, plastic delineators that were actually installed into the ground, and refined the design a little bit so that the turning radius would work for larger vehicles. Before this treatment, there had been one person who actually died at this intersection in recent years, 3 pedestrians who suffered moderate injuries, and 2 bicyclists who suffered moderate injuries. Since the installation, there have been no recorded crashes. And after we saw the success of that demonstration project, which we did 6 of those throughout the city, just as a test, it was the city's first time experimenting with something like this. We scaled the program up with the semi-permanent treatment at 30 of our most dangerous intersections throughout the city. In the following year, we increased that number to close to 50 intersections, and we've continued to do that since then. The materials we used were just some acrylic paint, thermoplastic striping, and plastic delineators. The cost is about $2,500 per intersection. And I show this information to say that the paint and plastic curb extensions are not necessarily the highest quality of pedestrian infrastructure that you can implement specifically at intersections. You could do a lot more with concrete bump outs and green infrastructure, but using this low cost and quick intervention allowed us as a city to implement it at so many more intersections than we would have been able to. And the impact of that has been great. It not only works for people of all ages and abilities, specifically as pedestrians, it also helps emergency service response because it prevents cars from parking too close to corners, which makes it difficult for specifically fire trucks to make turns around those corners. So the next example of this is protected bike lanes. In Jersey City, protected bike lanes also started for us as a demonstration project. This is an example of one that we installed just for a long weekend for a period of 3 days. You can see the materials we use here are, beat up traffic barrels, delineators that weren't installed into the ground, they were just glued down. Instead of painting the street, because this was a test, we just used traffic tape that was again adhered to the ground. And this was just to show residents, elected officials, and community members that protected bike lanes actually can work in Jersey City. Before this test, it hadn't been done on the street before. And after the success of this project, we were again able to upgrade to what we call a quick build protected bike lane. This is an example, or this is a photo of the first ever permanent protected bike lane that we installed in Jersey City. You can see that it's right in front of City Hall, which is a great message that, the city is fully behind this and sponsoring this type of infrastructure. And the purpose of this was to implement safe and comfortable bike infrastructure, again, for people of all ages and abilities. Because there was a lot of political will and leadership and community support behind this, we advanced this project before our bike master plan had even formally been adopted, because the process was so successful. And we designed this transformation of the street within 1 month. The installation took 1 week. On this specific street, there was no parking loss and there was no travel lane reduction. And that was really important to us because this was the first of the protected bike lanes that we were going to install. And it was crucial to minimize anything that could be perceived as negative impact or a trade-off in order to make sure it was successful and we could build some consensus and support behind these projects. The cost of this specific bike lane was $30,000, and the materials, as you can see, are exactly the same as what we use for curb extension. And after we installed this one, we moved quickly to install bike lanes throughout the city. And you can see in the larger photo here that the design was refined over time. You can see that in this bike lane, it incorporates a floating bus stop, which is also a new thing for us. It incorporates curb extensions, again, traffic barriers. And as we started to iterate on these projects, we started to use bike markings that were representative of people who tend to be underrepresented in cycling. We started to use more substantial barriers. So you can see Jersey barriers being installed on one of our bike lanes, and continued to monitor and revise as necessary, which is the benefit of doing things with a paint and plastic kind of approach. And so in just over a year, we've been able to install over 10 miles of protected bike lanes. And the best thing about, these specific projects is that we can see not only kids and families, but also people who have, limited mobility and don't have enough space on the sidewalk step off of the curb and use the bike lane instead. It's really just added more space for vulnerable users on our streets. The next example is pedestrian plazas, and this marks a shift or really an evolution from projects that are just focused on traffic safety or pedestrian and bike safety, and more into the integration of traffic and transportation and placemaking and community building. So a lot of you may recognize this photo. This is our first ever pedestrian plaza on Newark Avenue. It's very successful. It has evolved over time and is now a local and a regional destination for people, has become this great celebration space in Jersey City. And one of our Vision Zero actions was to explore other areas in the city that also may be eligible for pedestrian plazas. And one example is this, where we were able to see a redundancy in the street network, where there were some cut-through streets going through neighborhoods. And we were able to test the idea of reclaiming that street space for pedestrians. So in this example, we just used some heavy planters to block off the intersections of this cut-through street. We planned a pop-up event, which was really a party, and we heavily programmed it in order to show what this space could function as, because without doing that, no one can really imagine that this place, which otherwise was used by cars to drive on and to park on, can be used for something else. So this design took about 1 month. The duration of the pop-up event itself was just for 6 hours, but the impact of it is really what's incredible. After seeing this transformation for a few hours on a Sunday, there was support behind making this a permanent street closure. And now we have plans in place for a full pavement to park project where this will be resurfaced. We were planning on getting play equipment here to serve the large amount of families and specifically kids who live in this neighborhood and otherwise wouldn't have had a park or any green open space to play in. The cost of the pop-up event was $6,500, and we've since been able to secure grant funding, both from NJDOT and from an international organization called Blue Zones, to make even more substantial improvements here. Another example of pedestrian plazas is more related to the pandemic in order to create outdoor dining space for restaurants who are struggling. And in this case, you can see that this is just a regular two-way street that we converted to a one-way by just, reclaiming one half of the street. We painted it green. It's something that we do for a lot of our public spaces because we have a lot of leftover green tennis court paint. And that's what we use to demarcate pedestrian spaces in a really quick and cheap way in Jersey City. And, a project like this where we're converting a heavily used two-way street into a one-way can very easily take several months to a year to design and plan. But again, because there was political leadership, council support, and community support for this to support local businesses, the design for this took 2 weeks. It took 1 week to install. We used similar materials, paint, planters, traffic barricades, and signage. And over time, this has evolved from the summer months where it looks like this to the winter months where people have built more substantial structures to provide outdoor dining. And because of the success of this, there is now support to make this a semi-permanent or even a permanent change in Jersey City. Sorry about that photo. The last example I have is of parklets, which again follows this theme of thinking of streets as places and having an approach to our transportation projects that's not just about safety, but it's also about livability and creating these beautiful, joyful streets. So again, parklets may not seem like they're safety related, but the visual friction that they provide on the street is really important to signal to people that a street is not just for cars to drive on or park on, but it can be used for a variety of other reasons. So again, our parklet program started back in 2017, just with a demonstration that lasted for a few hours. After the success of that, we were able to do a city-sponsored pilot program where the city would build a few parklets. We built about 5 of them, and we placed them at different locations throughout the city just to see how they functioned, how people adopted them. And the program, had its ups and downs. There was a lot of support for it. There was also a lot of opposition for it because it would replace parking spaces. And so we weren't really able to scale this program up until the pandemic. And during the pandemic, we started a restaurant parklet program, which you can see from the numbers. In 2017, we had 1 parklet. In 2018, we had 4. In 2020, we have 70, and that number is increasing by the week. And the reason for that is that we allowed restaurants to build their own parklets using guidelines that the city provided them. Overnight, we sort of created a permitting process to allow for parklets on our streets in order to help restaurants who were struggling during the pandemic. And what has resulted from it is these structures scattered all over the city that really just changed the look and feel of many of our streets. And so they serve the function of helping the businesses, but they also serve the function of helping show people who otherwise would have been opposed to projects like this, just how wonderful our streets can be for pedestrians, how they really can feel like destinations in themselves. And again, because of that, there's now support to make programs like these more permanent. And it reminds me of this idea that a street can work really, really hard to serve the needs of all of its people. And the fact that the point of a city, as Jane Jacobs says, is the multiplicity of choice. And so when you see people using the street for all of these various reasons, you can see that really coming true. So I'll end the presentation just with this last photo. This is actually my team and I on one of our protected bike lanes with our bike advocates. And the reason I show this is that what we've learned over the past few years in advancing all of these pedestrian and bike related projects is that it's really important for us as the designers and the implementers of the system, of our transportation system, to also be advocates for it, to also be using the infrastructure and learning about it and constantly monitoring and revising it as necessary. And so I just like to, put some emphasis on that for anyone who's joining this webinar who represents a city or a community group in a municipality, because this has been the most important aspect of our work in Jersey City. You can learn more about all of these projects at jcnj.org/transportation. And my email address is bpatel@jcnj.org.